We are going over an interview with Erin Roberts, the brother of Chris Roberts, also a pretty big part of the development behind Squadron 42 and Star Citizen. He had an interview at the Beijing Bar Citizen last month, and that information is just kind of starting to come out now. But it is all in a language that I do not speak. Luckily, Kitsune in the community was able to help with some translations along with a few others so that we actually can get the text of this interview, and I can read it for you now. So this is between Erin Roberts and an interviewer. Shout out to Hater on his Discussing Whatever Discord. This is where the translations are coming from. But I'll also keep the video itself. I'll link that in the description if that's something you guys want to just kind of look at. Or maybe you can understand it, then there's that too. Otherwise, why don't we start jumping into the details? Oh, if you guys want a more concise version of this that kind of talks about the highlights I like, obviously you're here for the long form, so you want all the details. But if you also want that kind of thing, it should be coming out on the main channel sometime in the next several days too. So keep an eye out. All right, first question that we got up here was about raids coming in the future. And this is an interesting one because raids are kind of a hot topic. They're sort of like one of those topics that was a very hot topic very briefly, and then CIG just kind of like, shh, don't worry about that. Don't think about that. That's not a thing. But if you go back to the Destination Adventure, which is just 2023, it's not that long ago, CitizenCon, you can see that they had some pretty big plans for distribution centers in particular and the type of gameplay they would support. One of those gameplays being full-on raids. Let's see if I can find where they talked a little bit more about this. You can see that they had a whole plan for how this would play out, but they have not had the time or the chance to implement it. Listen in here. Oh, sorry. Wrong. I totally pressed the... Wait, hold on. I just completely messed up my audio. Let's try again.
Will be accessed from this interior space. These will expand upon and increase the difficulty of these raids. Now let's take a look at one of these raid missions in action, but please note that this is early gameplay prototype of a raid.
As effective covering fire. And then you blow up, if you're me. You would have blown up there if you were me. So this idea of raids in the game, I mean, raids are in MMOs. It's not an uncommon thing. It's not something to be unexpected. And they talk, I swear I could find the spot here where they go into a little more detail. So he explains it a little bit more here, but you can see, like, honestly, that's the kind of thing that we would do normally in the sandbox, which is how missions are sort of supposed to work. They're supposed to be just that guiding hand of how to do things in the game that you are playing. But the gameplay isn't far away from what they just showed us. I mean, that's not very difficult to do. It's just do a mission, fight your way in, get something, and leave. I do think that they're going to go harder than that when it comes to the raids they're talking about here. But as per the text that we're looking at today, when they asked, are there any raids planned for the future, Erin Roberts does say this year. So I don't know if these will be related to the distribution centers. I kind of doubt it. Seems like they've moved away from that for a little bit right now, but we should be expecting something of the equivalent. And here's how they described them back then in 2023.
So raids are team-based missions with a focus on high-risk, high-reward operations. As Carl mentioned previously, you'll be able to choose how you gain entry to these locations. Coming prepared and geared up will make the difference between success and failure. Ultimately, you'll need to work together in order to succeed. So these raids will have you breaching the interior of the main structure, highlighted here. Now, each interior will comprise of rooms that reflect the location's specialism. For example,
that's kind of getting more back into distribution centers, which are unique. And I really don't think, again, that when they talk about raids, that's what they would be talking about here. That'd be nice, honestly. That'd be some good medium level, more intense type of gameplay, but they really need to make sure that we have the right rewards from that. And they made some mistakes with that kind of thing this year so far. So we'll see how that goes. Next question. When will the Siege of Orison return? Erin Roberts answers, well, we're actually moving away from that type of mission. What we're trying to do now is build missions or build locations you can go to where they're always there and you can always do stuff. So the idea is that we're trying to fill the world with more and more things to do. So as a new player, you can go, oh, I go here to do that. Oh, I go here to do that. I get that from over here. With Siege of Orison, it's a one-off event, which basically turns off, then turns on, then turns off, which is kind of cool. Then when it's gone, it's gone. So what we're working really hard now is to create a lot of locations in the game where you go and visit. You can go to a lot of different tasks and do a lot of different things. And also some of them, if you join the PvE rather than PvP side, we're going to basically look at building some areas which are more instance. So you can go in with yourself or your friends, then go and fight the environment rather than other players and so forth. We're going to start bringing that to the game soon. There's a lot to unpack in that answer. The idea that they're moving away from Siege of Orison is a really important one because those weren't dynamic events. You can go all the way. My God, look at how many times I've gone over this freaking system. Too much talk about quantum. Ay. But if you go back to the first talk about it, there is a whole section about... Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's the second talk about it. Right. You go to the second talk about this whole quantum economy and simulation. There's a whole segment
server. As each cutlass is destroyed on either server, the shared variable called enemies remaining is decremented. Once that variable reaches zero, the war phase...
This is meant to show how a dynamic event would occur. The thing being, this dynamic event only occurs because people would trigger them, those people being CIG. So everything we know, Xenothreat, Siege of Orison, even Jumptown, those things are all triggered by a CIG developer, meaning not dynamic. They're more global, which is why they call them global events lately. What they want to do, though, is continue this pivot towards these newer types of locations, these Hathor locations, or these kinds of what else? Ghost Hollow, or Korea, the security post of Korea. All of these locations allow you to do something that triggers an activity that may or may not attract other players, thus creating a both PvE and PvP area. So these are more important than the dynamic events because obviously, as he said there, they aren't events that get made and then aren't really a thing elsewhere in the game. These are things that will be here forever. They are sandbox locations put throughout the game so that you can just stumble upon them and do more inside of them depending on your playstyle. And honestly, that's what I've been getting out of it so far. I've been meeting a lot of people who just enjoy going to Hathor and getting some loot, running through the locations, getting some FPS gameplay, and then getting out. And it's nice that they're creating more open opportunities like this in the game and not just these get a ticket and come for the fair and then leave when it's done. And I remember I pointed this out last year on a video that talked about why it felt to some people like certain things Star Citizen did were not necessarily advancing the game forward quickly. One of those things was dynamic events, because it felt like those dynamic events, while were cool and definitely allowed for some resources to be used for the game later, they're not as reusable. Like Hathor as a location could take as much effort as a dynamic event like Siege of Orison or a global event, but how much more playtime is it going to get from players being around all the time, being somewhere they can trade out the loot and the enemies and like the scenarios? And then they do that in Pyro. They do it at these Hathor locations. They do it in other locations in R-Corp, and they do it in the distribution centers. And the more and more and more places they add that do this, the expectation is more players will have the thing that they want to do. That's, not what other people are doing. So that's the first part of this, and I think that's a really important one because it's not negative. People told me I was trying to make drama by pointing out that dynamic or global events might not have as much of a effect as, like regular missions and narrative stuff. It's not the case, folks. They see it too. Just like it makes more sense to do sandbox locations. You're still kind of sad you love the big events of Siege of Orison? They're not going to not do them. They actually talk a little bit more about them. Like, they want to keep doing these events. They just want them to be triggered by players rather than by CIG. They talk about that a little further down with the whole Vanduul thing, changing the lawlessness of a system and stuff. I think that'll still trigger stuff like Siege of Orison. Might just not be as purpose-built. The other side of this is where they talk about the PvE versus PvP and the instances and getting to pick where you are. And we know this to be the case because they were very, very clear about that during the Star Citizen 1.0 talk. They specifically mentioned that you will be seeing instanced battles, fleet battles, military blueprints, strategy-based missions, FPS operations. These are all things that are definitely coming to the game and are they're kind of like how CIG used to phrase this game as being. If you go back to, you type in Chris Roberts instances in Google, it should pull up your document that he made back in 2012 talking about how the game would work. And if you scroll through this, you'll see it's all about instancing the whole game. Think of a battle instance like Battlefield 3 multiplayer session or World of Tanks battle, with the key difference that the selection of players is done transparently and as in fiction. They wanted to split everybody up in this game originally. They wanted to make it so that when you went into space, it would put you in a space instance. Then when you went to the orbit over a planet, it would put you into an orbital instance. Then when you went down to the city, it would put you in a city instance. And each of those instances would load in with certain types of players. They shifted from that model to have something that would more naturally delineate the lines of which players wanted to encounter each other. But they are still kind of bringing back in that idea of instances, continuing to drive that forward. We see this discussed in, I want to say this video. No, not this video. Here. We see this discussed in this video where they talk about instanced municipal works in R-Corp. This is probably the first of instanced locations that we'll find in popular areas. And hopefully this is an excuse for them to not have to do the armistice zones everywhere. We'll have to see about that. Here's what they have to say about instance locations back at CitizenCon last year compared to now.
These gameplay areas will interweave with the London zone, but ultimately will be independent. So for Area 18, let me introduce you to the Municipal Works. And this will be split into two locations. The actual Municipal Works, which will be an open world sandbox area for all players, and the lower Municipal Works, known locally as the Depths, which will comprise of several instanced levels. So, how do I get to the Municipal Works?
Hold on. What's the instance for? Tell us about that. Let's see if we can.
So, depths.
Here we go.
And these will be instanced areas.
Okay, I'll let him explain that a little bit.
It's an area to do local missions, like exploration, repair, or even pest control. But the main purpose is provide access to the depths. And the instance area. Well, an instance area works in the same way as an instanced hangar. And as the name says, it's a separate space for you and your group. But why do we want to do this?
It's interesting they say that it works as the same as the hangar, because that means there's not necessarily a distinct split between these instance locations and the open world. Because you can open a hangar door and you have access to the PU. So the separation between something like this and the rest of the underground or the city might not actually be that jarring. Contested zones, frankly, aren't that jarring. They only really have doors that separate the areas. So they could do something interesting to make this still feel very integrated into the game, and I'm looking forward to seeing what their solution is.
This gives us the ability to create tailored missions that will provide a mixture of content like combat or exploration or puzzle gameplay, and fundamentally allows us to design challenging, meaningful content.
So we'll see. That, though, is kind of a little bit of talk about instancing during CitizenCon, linked up with what they're talking about here in this interview. And I realize I am taking forever on each question, so we're going to speed it up a little bit. Next up question, when will the refactor of item management system in the ground vehicle elevators be implemented? Erin Roberts says, that's being worked on behind the scenes now. Interviewer says, maybe this year. Erin Roberts says, no. Erin says, we're focusing very heavily on Squadron. So that's taking a lot of resources, so a lot of stuff goes to Squadron first, then it enters the PU. When Squadron's finished next year, then a lot of those resources will come back to the PU and so forth. But we are looking at a bunch of the PU, but on the system side, some of the systems we have to configure, We are looking at a bunch of the PU. On the system side, some of the systems we have to reconfigure because some of the old systems don't work with dynamic server meshing. Okay, there we go. More refactors. Although we have server meshing now, we need dynamic server meshing, and so we have to I don't know why it says that. So some of these systems we're talking about are all we've had too many years where we deliver and then the game doesn't work, and then you guys get very angry. So what we're trying to do now is we're making sure every time we deliver the game functioning, we're trying to make sure it's better each patch. So when we put a new system in, we're really going to test it for release. Interviewer said, well, we're happy to hear it and see it. And Erin said, we're going to leave it. We'll test it for a long time behind the scenes, and then we feel it's definitely ready, we will put it into the patch. That's why some of the systems are taking longer now, because even though the work's all done, we need to integrate it into the code. We need to test it, make sure it's all working properly, and then we'll do an ePTU with it. By doing that, we're extending it 3 to 4 months each time. But I think it's worth it to make sure the actual game is stable and ready for it. This falls in line with the whole playability pledge. It explains why the game is moving so slowly now in terms of features. We already knew that they're mainly focusing on really just the playability of Star Citizen, but more and more little information bits like this come out that tell us it's not just that they wanted to focus on the playability of Star Citizen, they wanted to focus on Squadron 42, and they can very easily also focus on the playability of Star Citizen in the meantime. Like, they're basically in a position of saying, okay, so we really need to put a lot more devs on Squadron 42. What can we do with Star Citizen while most of the devs are over there? Well, we can't work on features, but we can definitely stabilize the game. And we also want to have Squadron coming out in 2 years, so maybe having a stable game to back that up, and Star Citizen would be good. And we can still kind of keep working on feature development, it'll just be fairly slow. So that's what we're seeing. I mean, there are new features coming into the game in 4.2. We're seeing weather, dynamic weather come in, that's feature development. We're seeing radiation gameplay coming in, officially, that's feature development. And we are seeing the ability to get scanned and identified by NPC assets, essentially. All of those are features. So there is still some stuff leaking in, and I think as we get into the later months of this year, we're going to see a lot more. What I think is kind of annoying is that we just haven't seen it in the ePTU yet. And also the whole idea that this whole first part, really, we're focusing on Squadron, so a lot of resources are going to Squadron. People act like it's kind of a hot take to say that Squadron is getting most of the development and Star Citizen isn't. That's not negative. I had somebody telling me that this was like a negative thing to say. It's not. They're saying it. They said it in their financial reports. It's pretty clear that they are feeling the heat with Squadron, so they're focusing on that. We're seeing some benefits because of that in Star Citizen. We're also seeing some, setbacks, but I think people are pretty happy with where Star Citizen is right now compared to previous years. These are good features, and I'm really glad they're working on it. It sucks to keep hearing that it's Squadron that's holding everything back, but it's pretty standard at this point. The fact that they're talking about the item management system is good. This is something we saw being worked on in concept in the February monthly report, and it's clearly something that is very, very, very much needed, considering scripts and all the different things you can start to loot in the game now. We definitely need better item management. For that reason, I think they do want to get it in quick, but he is still saying that it's going to go EPTU first, and that should keep the game a lot more stable. As we've been seeing, the game is continuing to get more and more stable throughout the year, so they're doing something good there. I think people are kind of bummed out that we're not seeing those features yet. All right, continuing on. Oh, sorry, I didn't even talk about the ground vehicle elevators. We know that's been talked about for 4.2, so there's some level of development going on there. And I think there's something related to that in 4.2 as well. This interview took place before we knew about 4.2. It took place before Invictus Week, so some of it's a little outdated. Moving forward, is there any information about the future medical gameplay? Erin Roberts said, yes, you will basically be charged if you go to the hospital and so forth. And also, players should be able to be doctors and charged for their services and so forth. The interviewer asks, so is there any future T1, T2, T3 medical bed plans? He said, yeah, I mean, to be honest, they're not working quite yet, but that shouldn't be too far off. You know what else might not be too far off? The RSI Apollo. Is it possible that they have something in the works to update medical with the Apollo? I don't know. And spoiler alert, they don't say it here. Interviewer asks, so I want to ask you about, I can't see the logic behind the medical system mechanism right now. Because, for example, why should I put the T1 bed into use instead of a more T2? And will Death of a Spaceman be the final resolution? So I reckon that maybe consuming more resourcing and receiving the reviving count down can also be balanced. Erin Roberts answered, some of the beds are just determined by the ship they're in and so forth. So some are only going to cure superficial issues, and then for real, if you're damaged real badly, you have to go to a proper facility to get treated. We learned a lot about this when they made their post about medical. They made it back during like 3.15, but I don't know. So there's one post where they did like the lore behind how regeneration works, which was really interesting. So we know all about this kind of stuff. Death of a Spaceman has its own article that you can read from way back in the day. Obviously, it's going to be a little outdated, but it does explain the sort of destination for how we're going to handle life and death in this game. This one is a little bit more up to date and talks more about healing gameplay, but also just kind of the stuff that makes up Death of a Spaceman. So for instance, a cycle is a very important term. This is a life in Star Citizen, is a cycle. Whenever you die in Star Citizen and you get regenerated, you're going through a cycle. You're not actually going through a life. A life only occurs when you go through some number of cycles. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 12. It can change. You can add more, you can lose some. It really just depends on what happens to you throughout the period of these cycles. They're starting to introduce us to this lore in the game right now with the regen crisis, but this is going to be implemented at some point to help drive the actual game forward and what people are doing in it. So if we go back to what Erin Roberts was saying here, he'll dive deeper into that. The interviewer asks, for now, the medical mechanism, if you injure too badly, you can just revive. But for the future, there's going to be Death of a Spaceman. And is that really the only solution about balancing the whole mechanical system? Erin asks for some examples, and the interviewer says, for instance, I want to use the T1 bed because Death of a Spaceman costs too much for me. Basically, he's saying, I don't want to lose everything, right? Wait, is that what he's saying? Death of a Spaceman costs too much for me. I'm assuming means I don't want to lose my whole life and have to restart and lose the money and reputation. so I'd prefer to use the T1 bed to respawn. He continues, it's really too difficult to use the T1 bed because it costs more medical resources. We know this to be a thing in the future. And so when the situation can come up, I will choose to use the T2 bed to transfer my body to the landing zone, and there will be a T1 bed. So is there any balance between the different beds? Basically, he's saying, I could use the bed in so-and-so, wherever. Transfer your body is an interesting thing to say. So he's basically saying, I don't know why you would need to choose to transfer your body besides, like, you don't have the resources to use the T1 bed. You could just cancel your imprint and that would automatically send your body back to a city. You don't have to use like another bed to do that. But his whole point is basically, what if I don't want to deal with trying to get healed in the field, and I don't want to have the problems of being in the field, so I just send myself back to the city and get completely healed by a T1 bed. Erin said, I mean, obviously Death of a Spaceman hasn't been fully implemented yet, but the way it's really meant to work is basically there's some sort of like I said, Death of a Spaceman is purely about, typically is if you get revived too many times and so forth, then you may have to, or even at the end of it, you'll have to just start a whole new generation. Holy crap, that was hard to read. He's saying the same thing I said earlier about the cycles. Or you might have to start a new person and so forth. And it all goes all the way down to just superficial injuries and so forth. A lot of so forth. So the idea is the T1 bed is basically what it's treating and what you can treat. So if you're in a small ship's medical facility, it can basically fix up certain things, but you have to go to the larger hospitals for the bigger issues. Now, of course, those costs are higher, but that is basically where the medical system is going to go. And if you get damaged too many times, then basically you're going to have to regenerate. So it's a money sink. A money and resource sink is how they hope to encourage players to use different types of beds and how they encourage players to not use certain types of beds in certain situations. They've gone more and more this route, and I think Death of a Spaceman will also go more and more this route, basically just saying, hey, we're not going to take away a ton of stuff for your character or anything like that. We just want your money. Interviewer answered this, said, yeah, I personally thought maybe there's choices between if I should cost more medical resources to use the T1 bed, or I just choose to go to the landing zone and use their medical facilities just to pay the money. Erin says, but if you use your own, then it's much more flexible because you can park your ship in a combat zone. Interviewer says, yeah, but there's a balance issue because maybe that costs too much. Erin said, sure, but I'm saying that the reason that I would use it is if you're out of your org and you're taking over someone else's base, then you park your medical ship a kilometer away. If you get shot and taken down, then you could respawn back in your medical bay a kilometer away and get straight back to fighting. If you go back to the main facility, you're like 500 million miles away, and it'll take you a long time to get back. So it's about what you're using it for and so forth. It's time versus money. All right, the rest of this comes from the full recorded interview with Erin, transcribed by Kitsune. Thank you again for that. This is our quick round. Actually, there's some really interesting stuff in here as well, so I'll try to get through it relatively quickly. With the introduction of things like script, will there be alternatives to UEC transfers for untraceable activities? Erin said there's going to be other forms of money in the game that you can use. There will be, and also you could buy a bunch of materials and let someone else take them, and then they could go sell them. It's just like bartering, but there will be other ways of doing that kind of stuff. So different kinds of currency. We already see it with scripts, but I guess there will be some other things that you can just trade with. And this also hints at player trading. The interviewer asked, so the whole level, the tier thing is combined with, how will ship insurance affect future crafted ship modifications, such as hull leveling? Erin said, I can't give you exact details on this, but the way insurance is going to work, I think Richard talked about it at CitizenCon. Basically, you'll be able to insure your ship at different levels. So you have the basic insurance, which is basically just you get your ship back. Just back to the way it was in the showroom. And then if you may have added lots of cool equipment, you'll be able to insure that equipment as well. But that costs money. There will be different levels of insurance you can do. I think a lot of people are waiting for this. So you don't want to fill your ship up with a bunch of stuff if you're just going to lose it and not have it ever again. The interviewer said, so the whole level, the tier thing, is combined with the other components or something like that. And Erin said, it's about what you want to insure. If you just want your ship back, that's one thing. But if you want your ship and everything else you got on it back, that'll cost more insurance. Just like if you own a house and the house burns down, they rebuild the house, but they don't give you your TV, your books, your everything that's in your house back, unless you paid insurance for that too. Questions continue with, is there any future mechanic plan that will reduce the amount of NPCs in an area as more players enter? Erin said, it's not in, but we do want to control the density of NPCs and also when we want them and when and so forth. Then he talks about spawn closets. The next question is, will the base inventories function similar to CitizenCon, where it's accessible from everywhere on the base? Erin said, that will be the way it will be when it's finished. So basically, if you have a location, if you stored 100,000 units of gold, and then that 100,000 units of gold is in that location, not anywhere you want it. Interviewer asked, so we think if we can actually transfer these things by ground vehicle, that would be useful. And Erin said, you'll be able to pay to have it transferred. So you'll be able to say you have a ship. I want my ship to go over here, but then you'll pay a little cost for it to be moved. And there will be a little bit of time associated with it, so it won't instantaneously arrive. This is a big revelation. This is talking about on a base level, but this is essentially turning the claim timer that CIG has already said is mainly used for just getting ships that aren't in the right place at the right time. It's basically taking that service and assigning a real in-lore reason for it to exist. Instead of claiming your ship and magically having it appear in the elevator, technically you're calling somebody to transport your ship to where you are. It'll have the same time delay or a similar kind of time delay as what the current claim timer is, and it'll be explained in lore. It's just being delivered. This will probably be true for commodities, for equipment, for your vehicles, for your ships, and that's going to be a huge saving grace for a lot of folks who don't like the idea of just going everywhere to get things. What I really would love to see is if this is a service you'll be able to use from Spectrum when you're out of game. Maybe you're going to head home from work soon and you know you're going to need to be somewhere else, so you get your stuff transferred there and pay a little extra UEC ahead of time. I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, similar to Elite Dangerous, and it's a good call. The interviewer asks actually the same thing. Do you see moving ships in the future? And Erin says yes. Basically, wherever your ships are, you'll be able to. If you want stuff at a certain location moved, you'll be able to move it. There'll be a time cost for that. Interviewer said, if they're in the same location, the magical transfer won't happen or will happen. And Erin said, no. If it's in your location, then yes, whatever is there will be there. It's basically going down to the cargo bays, underneath your base. It's been loaded, then it's gone up to you. But if you don't have it in that cargo bay, if for instance you have 50 ships and 10 of them are somewhere else, they'll tell you where those ships are. And if you're in the location, they'll be grayed out. You can't get there. But you'll be able to say, oh, bring me my ship. You'll press a button, and then it'll basically say, okay, the ship will arrive in a certain amount of time, then it'll arrive at the location for you. And the interviewer asks, so actually the point I want to say is the facility actually produces things to the location, to the storage. The line between these things can be transferred by ground vehicles. So I think it's a pretty good idea to send ground vehicles to transport those like real ports, and the boxes actually move from point A to point B. So the interviewer is saying, we don't want it to be everything is available all around your base. We want to have to transfer stuff around our settlements. Erin answers, what will happen is the other thing that will happen is when you land, you'll have the ability to basically, there's some guilds that will do that for you. So there will be like a cargo guild, and you'll know for a fee. They'll unload your ship for you and load it for you. All the kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff will be costs you can obtain, but they will do that and move it from different places for you. And if you're a member of the guild, you will get like a discount for all that kind of stuff, and it'll be done faster and so forth and things like that. Reputation stuff. I don't know. It's an interesting answer because it's kind of all over the place, but I get the idea. Basically, he's saying like, you'll be able to get things loaded and transported by the game. Next up, we get a question about medical beacons. Very funny one. Very funny one. My man, AAK, hope you're watching. Erin Roberts said, medical beacons, that works now. And the interviewer said, yeah, it works, but nobody uses it. A different interviewer said, it works, but when I call the medical beacon, someone helps me up and gives me one shot. Erin said, with that though, you'll be able to rate. It's basically going to be like an Uber rating. If people do that a lot, then if someone says, I'll come rescue you, and they've got like 1 star, you just don't tell them where you are. And if they do have a bunch of stars, you do tell them where you are. This is a system that they talked about at this last CitizenCon as well. We saw it very briefly, and they didn't really go too in depth with it, but it does give us some idea of how they want this sort of stuff to reflect on the players in the game and what they're doing. So here we see the new beacon service, and you can see that you get ratings within each sort of thing. So here's medical. This person clearly has a low medical rating, so maybe they're that kind of person one-shotting folks. But that's a guide beacon versus a service beacon, and this whole beacon system will allow for more natural ratings and understandings of how crappy some players can be. Next up, the issue council is currently difficult to use. Are there any plans to improve it in the future? Erin said, I know they're always trying to improve it. That's publishing, and I'm just on development. The whole issue council, that's done by John's group, which basically does that. But I know they're always trying to improve that on the issue council because we take those issues and they send them at us in development, and then we look at the highest ranked ones that you all send us, and then we try and work down that list. So every patch we try and hit a few of those as we go along. Next question, will there be more NPC interactions such as conversations and missions? He basically says, look at 411. We saw it with the comms calls. We already probably are like, yeah, that's normal. But before 411, there were no missions really that used much dialogue between mission givers and you. So that's what he pointed to. And it looks like that's coming up in even more missions. Like, I think that's going to be pretty regular now in Star Citizen. Question number something. Will there be dynamic events similar to Helldivers 2? Erin said, I mean, right now, obviously we're working and focusing on getting a lot of content and a lot of gameplay in, but we definitely are going to have dynamic events in the game, such as a huge pirate attack, and you have to go and fight it off with the band or whatever. That kind of stuff will be happening. They'll get more into this in a little bit. Will players be able to join multiple organizations in different professions? Erin said, yeah. You'll be able to, absolutely. Not only will you have sort of a lawful or non-lawful rating, but also you'll have ratings with different organizations. This is actually in the same panel here. You can see that you get org requests. This is for like player orgs. But then there's also a whole segment here. There's some like level of org, alignment and loyalty. So this is like for player orgs, I think. No, this is also for regular orgs. So you can see that like the guilds will give you reputation bonuses and stuff based on how aligned with them you are. So you can align with certain guilds and certain factions in the game. And this is why they're starting to lower the number of factions in the game. It bums me out, but you can see where the technical challenges do start to come in with this, and having all this detail for every faction and guild gets out of hand pretty quickly. So Erin goes on to say here that you could be, there could be two pirate organizations, and I could be your pirate organization. They really hate me. I can hang out at their place. I can do stuff with them. I can do missions that they give. But then another pirate organization may hate me because you're enemies, and then I can't do it with them and so forth. So you can decide as a player. The interviewer said, but if I change my outfit and do that verification for that, maybe I can work for both. And Erin said, it's not in yet, but we are going to allow the player in the game, which is part of, at the beginning of the game when you make up how you look, basically. Later on, that'll actually be in the game, and you'll be able to go basically into a cosmetic shop and just change the way you look. Obviously, you have to pay for it, but if you do that, that's what changes, so that you can clear off your records and all that kind of stuff. You can do other stuff. It's probably going to allow you to make some small changes to reputation and get by, but I don't think it'll be like a reputation reset sort of button. It is a very interesting feature. The idea that you'll be able to change your look in this game, and it actually has an in-game effect as to who recognizes you and whether or not they're willing to work with you because they recognize you. That's kind of funny. You would think that they'd all be used to people completely changing their appearances and not just like letting someone walk through the door because they look a little different, but who knows? Interviewer asked after that, outfit can just be part of it, but different organizations, especially the outlaw ones, can have their own verification like cards or anything like that. And Erin said, we'd have to think about that. We haven't thought about that. He said, that's my personal opinion. And Erin said, for me, if I put on, just because I changed my uniform, and the interviewer said in the verification too, because Moby-Glass, Erin said, we can do it. We just haven't. That isn't something that right now we're focusing on. But I understand what you're saying is You want to go some places, you want to pay some money, they give you like a new verification so you can... Interviewer said, yeah. And Erin said, so we're planning to do stuff like that, definitely. We're planning to do that, also to fix your own rating. But they're not working. If they're planning to do it but not working on it, I just wouldn't even think about this. I would forget about the idea of paying for different verifications. It's a cool idea. But I think even just the idea of changing your look and getting a difference in gameplay is crazy on its own. Moving forward, we've got some narrative stuff here. The question is, will narratives affect the game world more dynamically, like more player NPCs spawning in a pirate raid event? This has some inklings of reference to quantum simulation or Starsim. It also kind of points back towards that Helldivers 2 question we saw earlier. Erin answered yes, there will be times when that will happen, but basically right now we're just starting to put a lot of the stuff in. So as we go through, depending on what the player does, like missions and things you do are going to be, depending on what you do will change. The outcome of the mission will change what you go on to do and so forth. I'm just thinking of missions as one part. Missions could be lots of different things to do and different routes to take. So that's what we plan for. We'll have a full story arc in the PU, as well as you can do anything you want as well. And then we also have to put in the new starter player experience, which isn't in yet, which is going to be very much about having players start from a very small place, not unlike Luke Skywalker and his little farm, longingly staring off into the sunlight. Ah, Luke. He then goes and gets his first spaceship. So for new players, when you go to 1.0, the experience should be you don't get a ship right away. You start, you learn decent stuff, you get a ground vehicle, you drive to the local spaceport, then maybe you get your ship. Then you go to class and so forth. So we want to make it that way. And of course, all those areas will be very, very safe for new players, so they can't be griefed by people. And then you get them out there on the train and stuff like that, and then you leave the safe areas, then you can do a lot of things. I hope that this game lets you choose your start, whether you want to start out in the frontier like they're talking about here, on a space station maybe, in like a mining industrial sort of scenario, or in the city like we would now. But I do really like what he's saying here. It reminds me of the start you get from No Man's Sky, where you have to kind of repair your ship and understand the smaller parts of the game before they send you out into space and overwhelm you with all the choice. Star Citizen's definitely a game like that. And I think if they remove you from highly populated areas or highly technological areas and introduced you to just like a couple NPCs, a couple ground buildings, a multi-tool, and a ground vehicle, and then they give you maybe like 2 or 3 missions to work through, whether they're repairs or moving items around, but they get you like using your multi-tool, driving a vehicle, interacting with NPCs, finding objectives, and maybe like equipping clothing. That's a great start. And then you kind of like, you let them soak into that for like a good half hour, 40 minutes, yeah? And then at the end of that, you finally get them into a spaceship, or not even that, you get them into a city where you're just like, oh wait, these ground locations, they can get so much bigger. And this reminds me of Tatooine. This is so cool. I wonder where the garages are. And then you find your hangar or whatever, and you get in the spaceship, and then you are able to fly out into space. And it completely changes that first experience of the game. So I'm glad to hear that they're interested in doing something like that. And I'm not surprised. They love their dramatics. The interviewer followed up by saying, talking about narrative, is there any chance the same location will change factions? For example, some outposts in Pyro, so one day it's controlled by CFP, and the next day other factions invade this location and suddenly it changes. Very Far Cry-esque. I really enjoyed that. Excuse me. I really enjoyed that from the Ubisoft Far Cry series. It's always cool to take over some land and know that you have that backup and that supply there. Erin answers this question. He says, yes, that is definitely one of the things we like to do. And honestly, that is such a relief to me as somebody who has been getting a little nervous about their changes to the reputation systems. This interview gives me some more confidence that they still have some very nuanced, in-depth ideas for reputation. I'm still bummed that they're removing them from the local scenario. And I'm still a little confused because these kinds of things they're talking about with reputation, where you can like lose missions and not be able to do certain things and not be a part of certain guilds, is also the kind of thing they were sort of saying. They were like, we don't want players to have these consequences and issues that come up from their reputation they don't understand. But then like, that's exactly what this kind of stuff is. So I'm not sure if that was a misspeak. I hope it was a misspeak. And really that was all just a technological restriction. Many of you might not know what I'm talking about. Just basically they're removing like Hurston, Crusader, and R-Corp as reputation holders in the game. That was something we covered a few weeks ago. So this gives me more confidence there. It still doesn't quite calm my fears that we might not have as much local reputation, but it's certainly a big step in the right direction for me. I like what I'm hearing here. The interviewer asked, is that going to be something that happens this year? And Erin answered, no, I don't think so. I doubt it. That's definitely one of the things we've talked about. We want players to go and take over these places. So if you've got an organization and you build a base, then you need to man that base and take care of it. Because if you're not, then some other organization may come in and take your base from you. Very cool. They've also talked about how abandoned bases will eventually be taken by NPCs and like outlaws that'll just be on site that you have to clear out. So this idea of like an existing world where you can lose and take properties, outposts, and bases, that could be really cool if it works out, but I don't know how far into that they want to go. Interviewer asked one more follow-up there. There's another part that we want to see. Are there any plans for narrative-driven events to be implemented? Just like the Helldivers and such, that players can affect how the event, how the story goes and ends. Talked about this a little earlier. Erin said, yes, the idea would be that when there are large events and if the players manage to, let's say the Vanduul come into this system, then the UEE will ask for the player support and then they beat the Vanduul up and the Vanduul are out. But if you don't, then the Vanduul have more presence there and there will be more damage. So it's basically about the players should be able to affect how lawless a system is and so forth. I don't think we'll actually switch a system from being like high level security to lawless, but I think there will be some gradients of that category that your system can swing based on what's going on in the everyday life. And that's Starsim, really. He said, if there's lots of pirates coming in and you get rid of the pirates, then basically the UEE will have more power and you'll be able to protect places and so forth. So we're planning to have dynamic events like that, where you just sort of do a big push and we up the scale of people invading the system, and that's up to the players then to repel that or not. And if they don't, then the system could become lawless. That's one of the plans. Once again, that's a long-term plan for 1.0. Not something we should expect anytime soon, but that could be a really big gameplay element. Very curious as to how they track that kind of thing, because we do know about this sort of stuff in games like Helldivers, as is being referenced. So it's not out of the ordinary, but it's a lot for a game like this, that's for sure. I think it also speaks towards their ability to control a system versus letting more of that system's control go into players' hands. He even says that in these like new player areas, they're going to make them very safe. So it might not be the kind of place where you can just let it get lawless like this. It might just be reserved for certain types of places. Activity heat maps would be really cool for this game, especially on the star map. Player deployed ambush traps. These are questions from a separate interview answered by John Crew. So we're done with the Erin Roberts interview, and a lot of good information there, to be honest. I think that was a great drop of info that hopefully they give officially in the English format, so that there's no way my coverage of this is going to get all that far, and even if other people are covering it too, this should go out on official channels. So hopefully they find a way to summarize that. But the last bits here from John Crew are about player deployed ambush traps. So basically new signal jamming and kind of like screens to confuse sensors are used in the new missions in the game. They allow you to hide for the ambush missions, right? Just high levels of distracting signal jamming materials. Basically, they asked, is this something that players will be able to do eventually? Basically make a cloud of distractions so that people can hide in it in their ships. John said, yes, in the future, certain vehicles have the ability to deploy this kind of gameplay feature. Next question they asked about the 600i rework, which John said is still in concept and won't be released anytime soon. I am surprised. And then the final question for him was about in-game radios, which was already something that they asked Erin about, but he also confirmed, yes, this is a feature we've wanted implemented for a long time, but currently lack the manpower. Sounds like the rest of Star Citizen. And that's the gist of all of the information drops like this. We're getting great things in Star Citizen in terms of content and narrative, and there are fantastic things in terms of mechanics and features planned, but a lot of those we're just not going to see for a while. We have hit that plateau. We hit that server meshing milestone, and they are now in a different kind of mood. They want this game up to snuff, and really, I don't think they want to see it drop from snuff again. Can I say that on YouTube? They want this to be good enough to play, and they're basically going to treat it like any other game that has an experimental mode where until that experimental stuff is good enough to play and not ruin the game, they're not going to drop it in. So I think we can rest assured from now on that Star Citizen will only continue to get more stable, but these kinds of features and developments are going to take longer to come. Either way, I still think this is a fantastic news drop. I hope you learned something from this and enjoyed. Thanks for watching.